most jurisdictions, this is going to be good for plumbing code CEUs or credits, depending on how you're looking at it. One thing to keep in mind is upon completion of this course, you will have the opportunity to save or print your certificate or both, but that will not appear until this course that you're in right now is completed from front to back. We're going to start out in Chapter 3, and Chapter 3 is General Regulations. In fact, 3011 starts right out with minimum standards, and you gotta love it, right? Anytime a code brings minimums into the mix, we love it. Okay, so in getting into the actual code itself, you'll see there's a lot of writing here on the screen. One of the things that I've done is I've gone through and highlighted some of the more important sections of the code as far as when testing comes into play and out in the field, according to what some of the inspectors have told me that you should be keeping an eye on. So those are going to be areas that you're going to want to focus on. But other than that, I am still going to narrate what's on the screen in front of you. So that way, if somebody has an issue with reading or comprehension, oftentimes somebody reading the material to them will help in them understanding what they're talking about. 301.11 approvals. All pipe fittings, traps, fixtures, material, and devices used in plumbing systems shall be listed or labeled, of course, by a third-party certified organization, by a listing agency, and shall conform to approved applicable recognized standards referenced in this code, and shall be free from defects. Now, here's the highlighted portion starting. Unless otherwise provided for in this code, all materials, fixtures, or devices used or entering into the construction of plumbing systems or parts thereof shall be submitted to the authority having jurisdiction for approval. Now, what do we learn here? It doesn't matter what your relationship is with your authority having jurisdiction outside of work. During work, he is the authority. So make sure all materials are submitted to 30112 markings. Now this is pretty straightforward. Each length of pipe fitting, trap, fixture, material, and device used in a plumbing system shall have cast, stamped, or indelibly, which means put there by the factory, marked on it with the manufacturer's mark or name, which shall readily identify the manufacturer to the end user of the product. When required by the approved standard that applies, the product shall be marked with the weight and the quality of the product. Materials and devices used or entering into the construction of plumbing and drainage systems or parts thereof shall be marked and identified in a manner satisfactory to the authority having jurisdiction. Highlighted portion, such marking shall be done by the manufacturer. Field markings shall not be acceptable. Let me give you an example here. Out on a job site once years ago, when I am helping an installer finish up his work, one of the things that he had asked me to do was finish hooking up the water piping to the water heater and do the venting for the furnace. In each of those instances, myself being a service technician by trade, I did what I thought was right. I turned the markings over because to me, when I saw those markings, they didn't look nice. Turns out that when the inspector showed up, he comes over, looks up, and says, "Well, hopefully you didn't glue that venting yet, did you?" I said, "Yeah, of course I have." And of course, as a technician, that took me quite a while to do that stuff because that's not something I do as my daily routine. So I was pretty proud of the way it looked, and it was done. It wasn't done to him. He made me take it all down and turn it over so he could see the markings past the material, but then of course the lettering didn't line up in a straight line, so the installer didn't like it. So I ended up having to redo all of the venting, and unfortunately I had done the same thing for the condensate coming off of the evaporator, and I had done the same thing for the copper pipe going to the water heater. I had to redo it all. 30113. Standards. Standards listed or referred to in this chapter or other chapters cover materials that will conform to the requirements of this code when used in accordance with limitations imposed in this or other chapters thereof and their listing. Where a standard covers materials of various grades, weights, quality, or configuration, there may be only a portion of the listed standard that's applicable. Design and materials for special conditions or materials not provided for herein shall be permitted to be used only by special permission of the authority having jurisdiction after the authority having jurisdiction has been satisfied to their adequacy. A list of accepted plumbing materials standards is included in Table 14.1. IATMO installation standards are included in the appendix. So when you look at this and you weed out all of the writing and you narrow in on just the highlighted section, it all boils down to this. Anytime that you're going to use a design or a product that's not necessarily covered in the code, only the authority having jurisdiction has the authority to allow you to do that. In doing that, he's not telling you that your installation or your techniques are approved by the plumbing code. What he's telling you is your methods and the end result are acceptable according to the local standards, and that's why they're allowing you to put them in. So just because he's approving it doesn't mean that it meets code requirements. It means it meets local jurisdictional requirements, which could be the same thing, but they don't necessarily have to be. 30114. Existing buildings. This is a good one. In existing buildings, which simply means built prior to the effective date of this code, or premises in which the plumbing installations are to be altered, repaired, or renovated, the authority having jurisdiction has discretionary powers to permit deviation from the provisions of this code, provided that such a proposal to deviate is first submitted for proper determination in order that health and safety requirements as they pertain to plumbing shall be observed. Look, what they're telling you here is when it comes to existing buildings, the new code updates are not meant to render a building unusable. They're meant to give us all a set of standards that we can follow. And when it comes to existing buildings, if something was considered to be up to code in a previous code cycle or in the code cycle that it was built during, then unless you mess with it, alterations, renovations, repairs, you're not going to be made to bring all of this stuff up to code, right? That would just be impractical and, of course, a burden on the end user. (301.2) Alternate materials and methods of construction equivalency. Now this one's pretty straightforward as well. A whole lot of writing here, but it's really pretty straightforward. Nothing in this code is intended to prevent the use of systems, methods, or devices of equivalent or superior quality, strength, fire resistance, effectiveness, durability, and safety over those prescribed by this code. Technical documentation shall, that's a command, be submitted to the authority having jurisdiction to demonstrate equivalency. The authority having jurisdiction shall have the authority to approve or disapprove the system, method, or device for the intended purpose. However, the exercise of this discretionary approval by the authority having jurisdiction shall have no effect beyond the jurisdictional boundaries of said authority having jurisdiction. Highlighted portion: any alternate material or method of construction so approved shall not be considered as conforming to the requirements and or the intent of this code for any purpose other than that granted by the authority having jurisdiction when the submitted data does not prove equivalency. So what are we talking about here? Very similar to what we just talked about in the prior section, right? Any alternate method or materials used for construction and deemed as conforming to local jurisdictional requirements does not necessarily mean that it meets code. It means it meets the expectations of the authority having jurisdiction that put eyeballs on it. 30121 testing. This is where things get a little bit sideways, a little bit interesting. The authority having jurisdiction shall have the authority to require tests as proof of equivalency. Now, what does that mean? Well, that means if you're doing something that in the code official's interpretation of the code says, he looks at that and says, well, that's not according to code. And you say, well, it's UL listed and the manufacturer wants it done this way, and the inspector says it's not code. He can say, well, if you want to have that tested by a third-party organization that comes back and says, yeah, it meets such and such equivalency, well, he can do that. That 301211 says tests have to be made in accordance with an approved or applicable standard by an approved testing agency at the expense of the applicant. So this would be done at your expense. In the absence of such standards, the authority having jurisdiction shall have the authority to specify whatever the test procedure is. Okay, so not only is this done at your expense, it also doesn't pave the way for me. So if you have some new method of installing something or some new product and it's not in the code yet, and you pay to have it tested to show that it provides equivalent standards at what the authority having jurisdiction needs, and he allows you to put it in, if he wants me to do that same procedure, I've got to do all that too. 30121 2. The authority having jurisdiction shall have the authority to require tests to be made or repeated if at any time there is reason to believe that any materials or devices no longer conform to the requirements for which its approval is based. So later on down the road, they can come back and have you retest it. If new information comes along, maybe some of the installation techniques have led to injury or death or something like that. Potentially, you've even run into a scenario where 3013 flood hazard resistance. And flood hazard resistance for the plumbing code is not all that different from the mechanical code or any of the other codes. 30131 has a general ruling. Plumbing systems should be located above the design flood elevation. Well, by the nature of having a flood, water comes over the earth. So if you have a basement on your residence, then the very nature of the way a flood works coming over the earth means anything that's down below earth level in that basement is going to be below floodplain. So anything that's in that area is going to have to comply to flood hazard resistance standards. And there are some exceptions. Let's look at them. Plumbing systems are permitted to be located below the design flood elevation, provided that the systems are designed and installed to prevent water from entering or accumulating within their components, and the systems are constructed to resist hydrostatic and hydrodynamic loads and stresses, including the effects of buoyancy during the occurrence of flooding to the design flood elevation. Now, what does all of that mean? There's a lot of busy work going on there. Well, what does all that mean? That means if you're in a design flood area, then the fixtures and all that kind of stuff that goes below that level, maybe down in the basement, is going to have to conform with a few standards. And those standards basically say we want to keep uh, the flood waters on the outside and the sewer and drainage waters on the inside, and we don't want to have those things intermingle, but we also don't want the stuff to have the effects of buoyancy or floating, which obviously could strain the system, break the system, and we don't want these things to be susceptible to the hydrostatic and hydrodynamic effects of the floods, which are the crushing and expanding effects of the floodwaters. So if you can put it down in those areas, um, then that means it has to conform to all of those ideals. 3014, Alternative Engineered Design. One of my favorite sections of any code, if there was such a thing. If you've got a better way, there's a set of provisions that can make it happen. 30141, Design Criteria. An alternative engineered design shall, again, that's a command, conform to the intent of the provisions of this code and shall provide an equivalent level of quality, strength, effectiveness, fire resistance, durability, and safety. All very straightforward things. Material, equipment, or components shall be designed and installed in accordance with the manufacturer's installation instructions. And that's fairly straightforward. Basically, what you've got there is a requirement to have the manufacturer's installation instructions on site. Now, for some of you, you might be thinking to yourself, well, that's kind of petty. Why would they want that? Well, if it's not in the code, if it's an alternative engineered design, well, then what does the code official have to look at to know that the thing's even working right or installed correctly? They don't have anything except the manufacturer's installation guidelines. Your word is not going to suffice when all that's on the line deals with safety and public welfare. So you got to make sure that the installation guidelines are on site. 30142, permit application. Fairly straightforward here as well. Registered professional engineer shall indicate on the design documents that the plumbing system or parts thereof is an alternative engineered design so that it's noted on the construction permit application. The permit and permanent permit records shall indicate that an alternative engineered design was part of the approved installation. All they want is something down at the city that says an alternative engineered design was part of that record. Not a difficult thing to comply with at all. 30143, technical data. The registered professional engineer shall submit sufficient technical data to substantiate the proposed alternative engineered design and to prove that the performance meets the intent of this code. Okay, so what are they talking about here? Well, they're talking about we're talking about the engineering data for whatever you're going to install. Something that tells the authority having jurisdiction before you ever install it that, hey, this is going to meet your guidelines and your standards that you have in your local jurisdiction. And that's not going to be, again, it's not going to be something that he's going to take on your word. He's going to take an engineer's opinion of that, and he's going to run with it. So the engineer is going to have a lot of the final say on what you're doing here. Now, 30144 talks about those design documents. The registered professional engineer shall provide two, count them, two, complete sets of signed and sealed design documents for the alternative engineer design for submittal to the authority having jurisdiction. The design documents shall include floor plans and a riser diagram of the work. Where appropriate, the design documents shall indicate the direction of flow, pipe sizes, grade of horizontal piping, loading, and location of fixtures and appliances. (30145) Design approval. Any approval of an alternative engineer design shall be at the discretion of the authority having jurisdiction. I think we've covered that quite a bit. The exercise of the discretionary approval by the authority having jurisdiction shall have no effect beyond the jurisdictional boundaries of the authority having jurisdiction. What are they saying here? Well, if you're a guy in Tucson and your Tucson code official says, oh yeah, you know what? In Dallas, you can go ahead and do that. That's not a big deal. Well, the guy in Tucson, that's your authority having jurisdiction, telling you that you can do something in Dallas is probably going to be in the wrong. The guy in Dallas may disapprove. So going from one municipality to the other, if you've got different authorities having jurisdiction, then you have to change your mindset and make sure that the same thing that you're used to or that somebody else had told you is approved indeed in their jurisdiction. Any alternative engineer design so approved shall not be considered as conforming to the requirements and or intent of this code for any purpose other than that granted by the authority having jurisdiction. And that is the authority having jurisdiction for that jurisdiction. 30146 Design Review. The authority having jurisdiction shall have the authority to require testing of the alternative engineer design in accordance with 30121. We already talked about that. Including the authority to require independent review of the design documents by a registered professional engineer selected by the authority having jurisdiction at the expense of the applicant. So as you can see, installing something that is new, innovative, maybe not in the code yet but listed, could get very expensive. And this is just one little piece of the whole puzzle here. And if you want to look at it from a bit of a cynical standpoint, you can look at all we just talked about and you can put it into perspective with a scenario that we've had not very far from the very spot that I'm sitting. We had an 8-plex that was being installed, and in this 8-plex we had one code official that was overlooking this particular project. In this municipality there are 2 code officials over this particular section of real estate, but this one code official was overseeing this property. The general had a specific idea in mind for these fireplaces. This new fireplace installation or new fireplaces, I forget which one it is, was not approved in the code yet, but it was UL listed. So the inspector says, hey look, I'm not going to allow you to put them in these dwelling units unless you want to get it third-party tested. And of course, already promising the buyer that this would be installed, the general says, okay, well, we'll have that tested. So they have the third-party testing agency come out. And the third-party testing agency did all their tests and everything, and the general got the results back, and the results go to the inspector, and the inspector says, okay, well, yeah, it meets our requirements here in the city, and we'll go ahead and allow you to do that. Now, all of that was done, of course, at the general's dime. He's the one that paid for that. So a little while later, and I'm speaking with this inspector, he's in one of our classes, and I'm talking to him about this whole thing, and he says, a little while later, I am still out on the job site. It's a smaller community, so he's there almost every day, maybe every other day. And he could clearly see that they were going to begin construction on this second dwelling unit of this fireplace construction that they originally had tested in the first dwelling unit. So he goes in there and says, look, you're not going to be able to install that fireplace in this unit. And the general gets very upset, as you might imagine, and says, look, now this is all under the same roof. We've already had it tested and it passed and you said it was okay. He said, I said it was okay for that dwelling unit, not this dwelling unit. So as you might expect, he wasn't happy. But the code official wasn't wrong. Who said he wasn't wrong? Well, the board that overseeing the case. They said, look, if that's the way that the authority having jurisdiction interprets this ruling, it could be a different pressure zone. It could have different applicable things going on inside of that unit. And if he is saying you have to have it third-party tested because it's not in the code, then that's what you're going to have to do. So I asked one more question in addition to that of this gentleman. I said, so what happens if you go on vacation? This was about an 8-month project. I says, what if you go on vacation and your counterpart is the one doing the final inspection? Can he then come in after you've already said, yeah, you can go ahead and put all that stuff in and signed off on it and they installed it all. Now it's final inspection and you're out of town. Can your co-part come in and say, I don't know what he was thinking, but I'm not going to pass that? And what do you think the code official said to me? He said, absolutely. The guy that's in front of you is always right. Now, if you add that all together, that equals a very expensive turn of events. But if you also add in some of the other things, the right to have you retest it if they wish, or to have you get a design review by a registered professional engineer. You take it into the code official and he says, you know what, it looks like it achieves all that I needed it to achieve, but boy, I'm not an engineer. I can't interpret a lot of this data that I see here, but I know somebody who can. I've got an engineer friend down the street that we work with, and at your dime, I can go ahead and have him interpret this for me, and we can go ahead and get you rolling. It can get very expensive, as you might guess. 30147, inspection and testing. The alternative engineered design shall be tested and inspected in accordance with the submitted testing and inspection plan and the requirements of this code. You got to have a plan. Going forward in this whole game, the final step to having anything alternative engineered design installed, you have to have a future plan on how you're going to keep this thing running properly, so a maintenance plan, but then also an inspection plan for the future as well. And it's got to be left on site, because chances are you might not be the guy forever that's looking at this stuff. All right, 303, disposal of liquid waste. I think any self-respecting mechanical guy feels this way when you start talking about waste of any kind. And this particular section is fairly simple. It's long, but you could sum it up by just simply saying don't get rid of waste anywhere except through an approved drainage system. But we'll go ahead and read it anyway. 303, disposal of liquid waste. It shall be unlawful for any person to cause, suffer, or permit the disposal of sewage, human excrement, or other liquid wastes in any place or manner except through and by means of an approved drainage system, installed and maintained in accordance with the provisions of this code. Again, to sum it up, don't get rid of waste except through an approved drainage system. 304, connections to plumbing systems are required. Plumbing fixtures, drains, appurtenances, and appliances used to receive or discharge liquid waste or sewage shall be connected properly to the drainage system of the building and premises in accordance with the requirements of this code. Sure. Sum it up. Fixtures and appliances have to be connected to the drainage system of the building. Hopefully we're all on par with that. Otherwise things are going to get messy really quickly. See figure, smiley face, sad face, upper right hand corner. Blah. 305, sewers required. Every building in which plumbing fixtures are installed have to be connected to a public or private sewer except for the provisions that are provided in section 305.2. 305.2 says when a public sewer is not available for use, drainage piping from buildings and premises shall be connected to an approved private sewage disposal system. 305.3, one of my favorite actual sayings in any code. In cities and or counties where the installation of building sewers is under the jurisdiction of a department other than the authority having jurisdiction, the provisions of this code relating to the building sewers need not apply. Well, no kidding. So you mean to tell me if there's a municipality that follows a different set of rules other than this code, then this code doesn't mean anything? Yeah, interesting. Right? So these things here can be summed up in 3 simple phrases. The first section, every building has to be connected to a public or private sewer, 305.1. 305.2, when a public sewer isn't available, you can connect to a private sewer system, of course with approvals. And 305.3, if the installation of sewers is under different jurisdiction than the plumbing AHJ, which would follow this code, then this code don't apply. 306, damage to drainage systems or public sewers. 306.1, shall be unlawful for any person to deposit by any means whatsoever into any plumbing fixture, floor drain, interceptor, sump, receptor, or device which is connected to any drainage system, public sewer, private sewer, septic tank, or cesspool, any ashes, cinders, solids, rags, flammable, poisonous, or explosive liquids or gases, oils, grease, or any other thing whatsoever that would cause or could cause damage to the drainage system or the public sewer. Well, holy cow, no kidding. So you mean to tell me don't put anything down a drainage system that's not approved for it? Very similar to the section we just talked about. 306.2, roofs, inner courts, vent shafts, light wells, or similar areas having rainwater drain shall discharge to the outside of the building or to the gutter and shall not be connected to the sanitary drainage system unless first approved by the authority having jurisdiction. Very simple. Rainwater goes to gutters or outside the building, not to the sanitary drainage system unless the HJ has approved it. (308.1) Except as otherwise provided in this code, no plumbing system, drainage system, building sewer, private sewage disposal system, or parts thereof shall be located in any part or lot other than the lot that is the site of the building, structure, or premises served by such facilities. Fairly straightforward. 308.2, no subdivision, sale, or transfer of ownership of existing property shall be made in such a manner that the area, clearance, and access requirements of this code are decreased. 309, improper location. Piping fixtures or equipment shall not be so located as to interfere with the normal use thereof or with the normal operation and use of windows, doors, or other required facilities. Again, if you've got fixtures and plumbing pipes and such going through openable windows and doors and such, you know what? You might have some bad mojo coming your way. And so even in temporary job sites, temporary facilities for remodeling, renovation, testing, stuff like that, you still are not allowed to have fixtures and pipes and such run through openable doors and windows. 310, workmanship. 310.1, and it's worth noting before we even talk about 310.1 that when it comes to workmanship or craftsmanship, oftentimes going from one trade to the other, it's going to be in the eye of the beholder. The authority having jurisdiction is going to have the final say on what good craftsmanship is and is not. So 310.1, design, construction, and workmanship shall be in conformity with accepted engineering practices and shall be of such character as to secure the results sought to be obtained by this code. And again, that's up to interpretation of your AHJ. 310.2, it is unlawful to conceal cracks, holes, or other imperfections in materials by welding, brazing, or soldering, or by using therein or thereon any paint, wax, tar, solvent, cement, or other leak sealing or repair agent. 310.3, burred ends of pipe and tubing shall be reamed to the full bore of the pipe or the tube, and chips shall be removed. Anytime that you're cutting pipe, whether it's copper pipe or PVC pipe, both of them have their issues while cutting. When you cut PVC, oftentimes we tighten the cutter wheel too tight, and when we do that, it rolls the inside of the copper as we cut it, and so it changes the diameter of the copper, makes it a smaller internal diameter, and that creates turbulence and such. That's got to be reamed off, not just with a wedge reamer that could possibly distort the copper, but an actual reamer. And when it comes to PVC, well, whether you're using a hacksaw or a cutting tool, oftentimes we're going to have those burred ends on there, the little shavings of PVC that can get up inside of the system. Of course, that's going to stop up any shut-off valves, aerators, whatever the smallest areas on your system are. That's where you're going to find those shavings stopping it up. So make sure that you're cleaning up your cuts after you're making them. 310.4, installation practices. Plumbing systems shall be installed in a manner conforming to this code, applicable standards, and the manufacturer's installation instructions. In instances where the code, applicable standards, or the manufacturer's instructions conflict, the more stringent provisions shall prevail. 311, prohibited fittings and practices. 311.2, no drainage or vent piping shall be drilled and tapped for the purpose of making connections thereto, and no cast iron soil pipe shall be threaded. 311.5, no fitting, fixture, and piping connection, appliance, device, or method of installation that obstructs or retards the flow of water, waste, sewage, or air in the drainage or venting systems in an amount exceeding the normal frictional resistance to flow shall be used unless it is indicated as acceptable in this code or is approved per section 301.1 of this code. So it's fairly common sense. We're talking about plumbing here. We're talking about plumbing, water flows downhill. So if you're trying to get from point A on top of the hill to point B on the bottom of the hill, don't put anything in line with that system that's going to retard or resist that flow and cause stopping points. You go back into some of the older sewage systems, and basically without fittings, holes were cut in the side of the sewage systems and pipes were stuck in, and then they were welded around. And if you go down through there with a sewer service camera, you'll see these pipes that are just stuck way out into the to the sewage system, and it catches stuff as it goes down through the sewage system, and it can cause stoppage, retard the flow. 311.6, except for necessary valves, where intermembering or mixing of dissimilar metals occurs, the point of connection shall be confined to exposed or accessible locations. So, if you're hooking up dissimilar metals, it doesn't say that you have to have those things visible, but it does say they have to be accessible. You have to be able to get back to those to make sure that we don't have any kind of formicary corrosion or anything weird happening because of the dissimilar metals. 311.7. Valves, pipes, and fittings shall be installed in correct relationship to the direction of flow. Again, not to beat it to death, but we're just talking about going from point A to point B. And for those of you guys that may be mechanical guys, oftentimes in our mechanical field, we don't have direction to flow. We're dealing with refrigerant piping and things like that, and those are just straight through pieces of copper and fittings. Well, when it comes to water piping, we do oftentimes have arrows that indicate direction of flow, and those have to be installed in a correct pattern to make everything work right. 311.8. Screwed fittings. Screwed fittings shall be ABS, cast iron, copper, copper alloy, malleable iron, PVC, steel, or other approved metals. Thread shall be tapped out of solid metal or molded in solid ABS or polyvinyl. .312. Independent systems. The drainage system of each new building and of new work installed in any existing building shall be separate and independent of that of any other building, and when available, every building shall have an independent connection with a public or private sewer. Now it says when available. Now again, that's going to be up to the authority having jurisdiction if you're going to be able to veer off of that. But we have had instances in the past where we've had expansions or additions onto buildings that had very, very ancient style piping that was no longer accepted in the municipality, and instead of bringing in new service for the addition, they simply tapped onto the old stuff. And because they tapped onto the old stuff, the authority having jurisdiction said that there may be internal damage that that they may not even know about in the old piping, and so they made them replace everything in that building before he would pass inspection. So that's a huge oversight. Make sure, this goes back to the very first slide we talked about, make sure that you understand what your building official wants out of you. They're not unreasonable, and they generally don't waver in what they're looking for. But if you don't ask the right questions and you don't understand what they are looking for, then you can get yourself into a very expensive pot of hot water very, very quickly. Exception: where one building stands in the rear of another building on an interior lot, and no private sewer is available or can be constructed to the rear of the building through an adjoining court, yard, or driveway, the building drain from the front building shall be permitted to be extended to the rear building. However, as with everything, remember to ask your authority having jurisdiction first. 313. Protection of piping, materials, and structures. 313.1. Piping passing under or through walls shall be protected from breakage. Piping passing through or under cinders or other corrosive materials shall be protected from external corrosion in an approved manner. Approved provisions shall be made for expansion of hot water piping. Voids around piping passing through concrete floors on the ground shall be made appropriately sealed. So what's the moral here? Look, if it's going through concrete or things like that, or we've got an area that's going to be corrosive, we want to make sure that it's corrosion resistant, or that correct provisions are made for the type of aggregate that is sitting in. 313.2. Piping in connection with plumbing systems shall be installed so that the connections will not be subject to undue strains or stresses. Now, keep in mind, you can't help that a customer may hang their laundry on it downstairs. Will not be subject to the undue strains or stresses, and provisions shall be made for expansion, contraction, and structural settlement. No plumbing piping shall be directly embedded in concrete or masonry. No structural member shall be seriously weakened or impaired by cutting, notching, or otherwise as confined by the building code. Well, that's not a whole lot of hard stuff to remember there. Look, when we're talking about PVC, which we oftentimes are, PVC can expand a great deal in varying temperatures and situations. So you want to leave room for expansion and contraction if that applies to you. 313.3. No building, sewer, or other drainage piping or part thereof constructed of materials other than those approved for use under or within a building. So if it's not approved for use under the building or in the building, it shouldn't be installed under or within 2 feet of any building or structure or less than 1 foot below the surface of the ground. 313.4. Piping subject to corrosion, erosion, or mechanical damage shall be protected in an improved manner. If you've got a corrosion type atmosphere, you got to make sure that it's protected. It doesn't matter if we're talking about plumbing or mechanical or anything else. Anything that's in a corrosion type, a corrosive type of atmosphere has got to be protected. And if that protection becomes damaged, scraped, or anything like that, it's got to be protected again or fixed and brought up to the current protection method. So 313.5 talks about that, protectively coated pipe. Protectively coated pipe shall be inspected and tested, and any visible void, damage, or imperfection to the pipe coating shall be repaired to comply with section 313. 313.6. No soil or waste pipe shall be installed or permitted outside of a building or in an exterior wall unless, where necessary, adequate provisions are made to protect such pipe from freezing. Okay, so we don't want pipes in a situation where they can freeze. Now, there are some situations where that's unavoidable. We deal with mobile homes quite often, and mobile homes are an animal of a different color. Most of the approvals are different, unless you go in there and work on them after the fact. And they use heat tape and things like that help work around the subject. But always, if you're in question, ask the authority having jurisdiction. 313.12. Rat proofing. 313.12.1. Strainer plates on drain inlets shall be designed and installed so that no opening is exceeding 1/2 inch in the least dimension. 313.12.2. Meter boxes shall be constructed in such a manner that rats cannot enter the building by following the service pipes from the box into the building. Now, we've seen some of these rodent shows, environment shows, and they always know where to go to find out where the stuff is coming into the building. They go to the meter box or they go to the electrical conduit or something like that, and they can see where somebody's made a penetration in a wall, but they've left a big, huge gaping hole where their penetration was and didn't seal it up so that it's protected from the outside elements and rodents. 313.12.3. In or on buildings where openings have been made in walls, floors, ceilings, or for the passages of pipes, such openings got to be closed to protect the installation of their approved metal collars securely fastened to the adjoining structure. Threads on iron pipe. Now, we're not going to read through this whole big section here on threads on the iron pipe. There's a whole lot going on. It's 316.1.1 dealing with threaded joints. And it boils down to the 3 main sections I've got highlighted in yellow. Threaded plastic pipe shall be Schedule 80 minimum wall thickness. The next one, a pipe joint material is used, it shall be applied only on the male threads, unless the manufacturer indicates otherwise. Conventional pipe thread compounds, like putty, linseed oil-based products, and unknown lubricants and sealants shall not be used on plastic threads. So when we look at what we've got in our van, oftentimes we have one container of pipe dope. And when you're looking at threading compound or um, pipe tape or something like that, we often look at it as one style fits all types of pipe. And that's not necessarily the case, and oftentimes it's not even close. So when you're looking at it from that point of view, make sure that you understand that if you're going from natural gas to LP or to from one of those to a potable water source, there may be different pipe dopes or joint compounds that are required just in nature for, in case human consumption occurs, or even just because of the corrosive nature of the material that you're using it on. And there are charts all throughout the code book, and this is just one example, table 3.2, which talks about hangers and supports. I thought it would be necessary to point out that when it comes to code books, the plumbing code is a great resource. It's all inclusive. So all of these handy charts which deal with fire stop protection and pipe supports and linear feet of pipe for angled joints and such, all of those are found right in the code book. So make sure that you pay attention to those charts. They're not there for nothing. 408 water closets. Again, 408 water closets deal with a whole lot of stuff. Water closet bowls for public use shall be of the elongated type. In nurseries, schools, and other similar places where plumbing fixtures are provided for the use of children less than 6 years of age, water closets shall be of a size and height suitable for children's use. Water closets shall be equipped with seats as required below. And 408.2 deals with water closet seats. 408.2.1 Water closet seats shall be of smooth, non-absorbent material. Seats for public use shall conform to the applicable standard referenced in Table 14.1. Table 4.1. And 408.2.2, water closet seats for public use shall be of the elongated type and either of the up front open type or have an automatic seat cover dispenser. High dollar. 408.2.3, water closet seats shall be properly sized for the type of bowl. Chapter 9, Vents. We'll look at a couple of things dealing with vents before we get finished with this presentation. Vents required. 901.1. Each plumbing fixture, trap, except as otherwise provided in this code, should be protected against siphonage and back pressure. Obviously, we talked about not wanting to retard the flow earlier. And circulation of air shall be ensured throughout all parts of the drainage system by means of vent pipes, installed in accordance with the requirements of this code and this chapter and otherwise required by the code. 901.2 Trap seal protection. The vent system shall be designed to prevent a trap seal from being exposed to a pressure differential that exceeds 1 inch of water column on the outlet side of the trap. Again, that would stop the flow of the natural flow of liquids. Vents not required. 902.1 Vent piping shall be permitted to be omitted on an interceptor when such an interceptor acts as a primary settling tank and discharges through a horizontal indirect waste pipe into a secondary interceptor. The second interceptor is going to be what has to be properly trapped and vented. 902.2 Traps serving sinks that are part of the equipment of bars, soda fountains, and counters need not be vented when the location and the construction of such bars, soda fountains, and counters is such as to make it impossible to do so. Make sure you check with your authority having jurisdiction before you do any of this stuff on this particular section. When such conditions exist, said sinks shall discharge by means of approved direct waste pipes into a floor, sink, or other approved type of receptor. (90311) No galvanized steel or 304 stainless steel pipe should be installed underground and shall be not less than 6 inches above the ground. Remember, we're talking about vent pipe. 90324, hard drawn copper piping. Here we're talking about the indelible marking again. Hard drawn copper pipe or tubing, in addition to the required incised marking, shall be marked in accordance with either ASTM B306 copper drainage tube or ASTM B88 seamless copper water tube is listed in 14.1. The colors shall be type K green, type L blue, type M red, or type drain waste vent yellow. Sizing the vents. Again, we're not going to get too crazy with reading all of this stuff. This entire chapter is a phenomenal resource in sizing the vents and counting your fixtures and such. We want to jump right to the part that is highlighted. 904 size of vents, and this is 904.1 that we're talking about. The diameter of an individual vent shall be not less than 1 1/4 inches, nor less than 1/2 the diameter of the drain which it's connected to. So you want to make sure that when you're dealing with this stuff, you know what the bare skids minimums are. Oftentimes I run into guys that do things the way that they've always done it, and the way that they were taught was by somebody who did it the way that was always done. And in reality, the rules of thumb that have been around for decades are no longer valid. So make sure in going through some of these training sessions that you get back to the basics and you look at some of this stuff and realize that, hey, things have changed through the years. 906, dealing with vent termination, and I assure you this will be the end of our speak. 905.4, vent pipes shall extend undiminished in size above the roof or shall be reconnected with a soil or waste vent of proper size. 906.1, each vent pipe or stack shall extend through its flashing and shall terminate vertically not less than 6 inches above the roof or less than 1 foot from any vertical surface. Now a lot of people stop learning right there. And you think about that. You've got an area that goes up to a second story that's next to an area that's a rooftop. Now if that vertical surface on that second story has no windows or doors, this is what you would follow. If it has a window or a door, you've got to think to yourself, I don't want my vent gases going into that residential space, so I'm going to have to follow 906.2, which says each vent shall terminate not less than 10 feet from or not less than 3 feet above any openable window, door, opening, air intake, or vent shaft, or not less than 3 feet in any direction from a lot line, alley, or street. And the last thing we're going to talk about, 906.3, vent pipes shall be extended separately or combined of full required size not less than 6 inches above the roof or firewall. Flag point of the vents shall be prohibited where the roof is used for purposes other than weather protection. Vents within 10 feet of any part of a roof that's used for such other purposes, which could be, possibly a deck, shall extend not less than 7 feet above such roof and shall be securely stayed. You think about that. You want to make sure that that's at least 7 feet above the roof line, but you also want to be sure that you're getting up above the normal sniffer range of a human being on that on that potential deck or something used on the roof other than just the roof. 9065, joints at the roof around the vent pipes will be made watertight by the use of approved flashings or flashing material. Bada boom, bada bang. The end. Gentlemen and ladies, make sure that you do not forget to print your certificate when you click past this end page here. Make sure you click on it, save it, and print it. It's got your course ID numbers on there and the value for the course. Thank you very much and have a wonderful day.